Hey wood finishers, welcome back. So at the final stages of applying finish, and this is referred to as finishing the finish. Some people have also called this rubbing out the finish, both talking about basically just polishing and making any imperfections go away at this stage. So two things to point out. I've tried my best to get these under light so you can compare the two different finishes or finish applications, both of which have been sanded to 220 grit, and then the finish was applied with a brush. In the foreground here we have a water-based finish on maple, and then the other we have a polyurethane on Douglas fir, and both of which claim to be a satin finish, and hopefully this is coming through on the video. The water-based finish has a much higher sheen right off the brush. I haven't done anything to these. This is all in preparation of next steps. So this is a bit more diffused on the polyurethane finish. Has nothing to do with the wood or the species selection. It really is everything to do with the chemical makeup of these two finishes. I would encourage you to do this as well as tests of a lacquer as well. Shellac doesn't come in sheen options, but the sheen can definitely be addressed through the various steps that we're going to talk about here in a second. So, okay, so hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to throw down a strip of tape onto these boards, but before I do that, just kind of leaving it as is off of the brush. Right here you can catch that there's a little nib here, a little piece of dust, or a couple of these little defects that have shown up. And so with this process, I'll be able to, pardon me, to alleviate all that. So that's what I'm looking for here, is any defects. And because the polyurethane dries so much slower, two things: it has more opportunity to catch some of these little nibs or little foreign bodies that come into and collect onto the surface as it's drying. So just something to be aware of. All right, so let me see if I can get rid of those. That's on that side. I'll make a little strip over here that will be untouched. I'm assuming my arm is right in your view there, but here we are. Okay. So I'm going to start with this water-based finish and see what I can do. Nope, I want you there. So process-wise, before I can do any polishing, I need to do some flattening of this finish, and this is really best done once this finish has had a chance to cure, not just dry, but to fully cure. Big difference between the two. A dry finish, dry to the touch, it's just what the name implies. A cured finish means that it's been drying, and either the evaporative or the chemical reaction process that is going on with the finish has already happened, and we're allowing this finish as much time as possible before we start to do this next thing. Next thing is going to be flattening, as I mentioned. Has got to be done with silicone carbide paper. Aluminum oxide is not going to do us a great deal of good here. The big difference between the two is that the pores of the sandpaper clog much more readily in aluminum oxide. So silicone carbide is just a better fit for this. I have 400 grit in my hands. 320 would be fine as well. Nothing wrong with that, but because I have so few issues with this, I think jumping into a 400 saves me a step, and that's fine. In essence, there aren't any scratches on the surface yet. When I do the next thing, I'm going to be introducing scratches. So the deeper the scratches, I would use a more aggressive paper. So anyway, I'm going to go with 400 and then jump up from there. Okay, so I want to use something that is flat, so I have this piece of OSB. No, it's not. This is particle board. Yeah, this is, I think, technically chipboard. Anyway, just cork on both faces, and so the cork has a little bit of give. So over those peaks and valleys, this will start to address all of that and make a much flatter surface. If I were to just use sandpaper on its own, which is doable, I would want to fold the paper into thirds. And then the thirds helps to give you a little bit of grip where you're holding, and you can sand and abrade and it won't start to get away from you. A lot of people just fold in half, and this becomes a bit of a mess because there's really nothing to hold the paper in a check, and so you really start fighting the paper. So, all right, so now in theory we're ready. I've got paper, I've got something flat to abrade the surface with. Pretty big problem that I would run into here if I just went in to this operation now as is, namely that this finish is going to start to clog up the paper rapidly. So I really want to lubricate the surfaces between the paper and the finish, and there's a couple different ways I could do this. People talk a lot about mineral spirits, which is good in that it's relatively thin and it dries very, very slowly, so you can work the surface well. Some people mix mineral spirits, 1-to-1 ratio, mineral spirits, mineral oil. It makes it a little bit thicker so that the paper is physically removed just a little bit more from the surface of the finish. So I like what that does in theory. For a sample board, probably not a big deal, but if this was a full piece of furniture, tabletops or whatever, I need to remove that mixture frequently to be able to see the process and how well I'm abrading. So if I was going to do that, that's a lot of cleanup between each one of those successive sandings. So I prefer just using water, but I can't use water alone because there's really no thickness in that mixture and it's too aggressive. So when you're sanding with just water, it really doesn't keep you from sanding through. Some of the corners are usually the hot spot, but if there's any irregularities or any of these nibs that happen, then it's a bigger issue. So not just water. So what I've done here is I've mixed a couple of drops of dish soap with the water, and this will be what I need to do here to get this going. So generously throwing this thing around. I also want to get it started with putting some on the paper as well. Keeping this paper nice and tight. And this is as exciting as you anticipated it was going to be, I'm sure. A different soap mixture in here. I think I was using Murphy's oil soap, and that's where this yellow color is there. Nothing wrong with that. I just found it's a little bit too thick, and so I recently washed that out and used just the soap and water. So with the water, you can tell not doing a lot of work here, but it's already starting to evaporate a bit, and so I need to reapply, and that's why I like using a spray bottle. A lot of people will just kind of dip their sandpaper into that mixture, and that's fine. I think this is a better way to do it, especially if you've got a large surface. Alright, so that feels good. I want to make sure that any of those little nibs or nasty spots are all gone. And if they are, great. Then I'm ready to move on. I have to turn this so I can see it. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, all right. So I can see a little area here, much shinier than other areas. Let me see if I'm projecting that well. I am not. Right there. So you can see everything else has this really dull sheen except for where my thumb is. Those are all areas that are a little bit lower than the rest of the surface. And so I want to keep going until I've gotten rid of that. A little bit on this end as well. You can kind of see in this area and this area. Yeah. So, and then the tape obviously is throwing me off a bit. So I'm expecting there's going to be some weird stuff there. I'm less worried about that. All right. So in the interest of keeping this moving, I'm going to do this until that becomes a consistent sheen. And once that happens, I know the surface is level and flat, which is what I want. The next step for this is that I'm going to just do the same trick, but at a higher grit. Should also be said that I have an equal amount of coats. I've got 3 coats on this, which I would recommend before you start doing any flattening. There's just a little bit more here I need to deal with. If I have only 2 coats, or worse, if I have 1.5 or less, I know I'm going to start getting into issues with sanding through the finish. So 3 coats is best. Notice here there are no corns that are starting to develop. If there were anything, I can easily kind of scrape those things off and start over. Sometimes some piece of metal, scraper, putty knife, any of those things, you can kind of chip away those corns and reuse this. But if you keep this surface well lubricated, then you're going to be just fine. Okay, so I'll do this, and then afterwards I'll jump up to the next grit of sandpaper I have. In this case, I'm going from 400 to 600. And then once I've done everything with a 600 grit, then I'll pick up the video again and talk about next steps. So, all right, hopefully that was helpful. See you in a couple minutes.